And welcome back to another episode of the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. My name is Evan Transu, aka Detective Ev, and I will be your host for today's show, episode number 329 of the Health Detective Podcast. If you were on with us earlier, we were doing some lunch and learn, and now we are right back to our normally scheduled interviews/stories. And I do not want to take up too much time today because this individual definitely has a story to share. There's so much to dive into here. And I will say this, though, I am consistently amazed by how many episodes of this we can do and how many unique conditions people can still share. Like, the world of medicine is absolutely massive, and it's just insane how I think a few conditions, or I'll say a handful of conditions, constantly get thrown around in the health space because they're overrepresented, but there's a lot of people dealing with different things that don't get talked about as much. And certainly there's some overlap with some more common, not normal, but common things here. So I will read a little summarized version of the bio, and then we'll get right into it. So our guest today, Kristen Waldron, is a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner driven by her own journey to reclaiming her health. And during a complex 6-year battle with chronic health conditions, Kristen understands the struggle of anxiety, hormonal imbalances, digestive issues, allergies, mold illness, and more. Her quest for answers led her to a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome, ME/CFS, and dysautonomia, conditions that significantly impacted her daily life and ability to do normal, everyday tasks. Faced with the challenges of managing under-researched illnesses like ME/CFS and dysautonomia, that's kind of my point in mentioning this in the beginning, right? Kristen turned to functional medicine for holistic support. Instead of focusing on just a diagnosis, Kristen learned how to utilize the FDN method, which addresses everything non-specifically. Kristen found relief and remission with this holistic approach that aims to optimize well-being even for those who are facing chronic illness. Kristen, welcome to the show. So glad to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
One thing I will say, right from the get-go here, just to give yourself some credit, you described it in the bio as a 6-year health battle, but when I really dove into the entirety of your story, your symptoms actually started at a very young age. Like, maybe some of this major stuff started later, but this was something that you dealt with almost similar to me. I think I heard, or I read the words like 9 years old. So we were young kids dealing with some of this crap, and they're warning signs for what's to come, really. So with that said, my first question on the show always is, what were your health symptoms like, and when did they begin?
Yes, so I've had a complex journey. I've had a lot of symptoms for a long time. When my health really went downhill was 2017, when I had mono. So since then, I've gotten the diagnosis of ME/CFS, which stands for myalgic encephalomyelitis / chronic fatigue syndrome. That's the full name. Myalgic means muscle pain, encephalomyelitis means inflammation of the brain and spinal cord. I don't know if necessarily everyone has that with ME/CFS, but that's just the full name of the disease. And then most people with ME/CFS also have dysautonomia, which is when the autonomic nervous system doesn't function properly. So the autonomic nervous system controls basically everything in your body. It controls your heart rate, your blood pressure, your breathing, your digestion. So lots of people with dysautonomia have a lot of different symptoms. And for me, I think some of the dysautonomia symptoms go back to when I was young. One of the issues that I had starting around 9 or 10 years old was fainting. So I fainted a lot of times. But growing up, I had a lot of different health symptoms. Like, I had acne as young as age 9, which is definitely not normal. I had a lot of bloating and digestive issues. I had the fainting issues that were going on. I got sick frequently, like lots of colds, ear infections, sinus infections, lots of allergies. I don't know if I said that part already. I experienced a lot of anxiety, pretty severe panic attacks. I think by high school, I was having about 3 panic attacks a day, which is not normal. Heart palpitations. So just lots and lots of issues. But I think I was still functional. I was still able to be like a high achieving student. I was AP and honors. I did band, sports, orchestra, lots of things. But it was really in 2017 when I got mono, which is when my health really went downhill and all of my symptoms got a lot worse.
Okay. One thing I want to go back to really quick is, because what's interesting, I don't even know if you realize this, with the exception of kind of the allergies of all things and the fainting, everything up until the mono part is like identical. Panic attacks, acne, bloating, all that stuff. And again, we should know as a society, you'd think that this isn't normal for anyone to be dealing with, but you kind of hit the nail on the head when you talked about, hey, you were still a high functioning student. You were able to make it appear like everything's okay. And I think whenever someone has a symptom or set of symptoms that still allows them to push through and kind of do the things that they're supposed to do in life, it's easy to sweep under the rug unintentionally, not because someone doesn't care necessarily, but unintentionally. But to me, when we say it's not normal, it's like, no, not normal, red flag, warning sign, smoke starting to come up. We need to figure out what's going to happen later, because I did not end up dealing with the same exact things that you have described already. But the major diagnoses came like probably 10, 12 years later after I started dealing with my initial symptoms. So there's a decade here of warning signs before we actually started to make some changes. So you get mono, and what was going on then that started to take this from what already sounds kind of sucky, if I'm being honest, to now what you describe as like, this is the real stuff going on.
Yeah, so as you said, I had a lot of issues already going on. 2017 is the year that I graduated college. So I went to school in Massachusetts. I ended up staying in Massachusetts. Shortly after graduation, I got sick with what I thought was a sinus infection. It would not go away with anything I tried. So I was also under a lot of stress, just being a college grad, living away from home, 6 hours away, being sick, not knowing what's going on. So I got sick in May. I wasn't diagnosed with mono until August. And then I also had strep throat 3 times during that as well. So I was just really, really sick. And under a lot of stress. And then later in that year, I have 2 older brothers. One of my older brothers unexpectedly passed away. So then there's like a lot of trauma added onto that. So now I'm dealing with like the physical stressors of being sick and my immune system being shot, and then like so much mental and emotional stressors on top of that, which I think anyone would understand that could really take a toll on someone's health.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. And that, hear me out on this, please. That makes sense, because when it makes sense that there was something even more major, because when people come on the show, I don't think I always had this ability. It's just maybe after doing all these interviews, you can kind of read someone really quick. And there's certain people that come on and they're talking about a story that realistically was 20 years ago and they've been doing fine ever since. And that there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, you can kind of tell the way that they're talking about it. And then there's others that, again, there's nothing wrong with either, but I actually have even more respect for the people like yourself in this different group that I'm about to refer to, because I could tell almost from the first sentence, there's an emotional weight of this that's still very much present, which makes total sense given how recent all this stuff was. So I appreciate it that much more coming on and sharing this, because I think other people can sense that. And the people that are listening to this are not 20 years healed, right? The people that choose to listen to this are actively going through these things. So sometimes it's really refreshing to have someone on that really gets this with them, because they're still in it actively. So when did you, because it's actually kind of rare that you get these diagnoses at all. Sometimes Western medicine won't necessarily recognize it. So when did you get to the point that you actually got these diagnoses?
Not until this past November.
Oh, geez. Okay.
So it's been a while. So when I was sick, like with mono, going through all that, obviously my immune system was shot. So basically all of my symptoms that I mentioned earlier just got a lot worse. So allergies got a lot worse. I was waking up in the middle of the night, like gasping for air, feeling like I couldn't breathe. Went to the allergist. I was tested for a bunch of environmental allergens and pollen. I was allergic to like everything they tested me for. Put on 2 inhalers, and then they told me I was already on the strongest combination of allergy medicine they could possibly give me. So my immune system was just shot. And then panic and anxiety started to creep back in, but kind of makes sense after everything I was going through. And then I started seeing a chiropractor, which is kind of when I was introduced to more holistic stuff. I wasn't really familiar with the idea that you could actually do things to improve your immune system. So that was new. So I kind of started learning that through her, was eventually able to wean myself off of most of those medications. I really don't need allergy medicine that much anymore. So I made a good like initial recovery. So I was able to start going back to the gym, like literally 2 minutes at a time. I eventually got back into running a few miles a week, or a few miles a few times a week. But as I recovered that initial year, it seemed like every few weeks, every few months, I would just have this like lingering fatigue and I'd be like basically bedridden again.
Okay.
So I had heard that for some people it can take like a full year to make a full recovery. So I thought it was just that. But then eventually things started to get worse and worse again. Probably like 2019 is when things started to get worse. I had never stopped exercising during that recovery, but I developed exercise intolerance basically. So I would go for a run and my heart rate wouldn't come back down. So, like 3, 4 hours later, my heart rate would still be 120, 130, which is definitely not normal. And me having experience with anxiety and panic attacks, a lot of the times I just thought I must be anxious, but I don't really know why. But it became apparent that there's a lot more going on. And then anxiety is not normal either. Um, yeah, and then just that was probably like the main symptom that was bothering me intermittently. Just the exercise intolerance. My doctor kept saying it sounded like I had an electrolyte imbalance, but of course, labs were always normal. Couldn't figure out what was going on. And then yeah, just a lot of other symptoms came back, like hormonal issues. I was almost diagnosed with PMDD. Um, Panic anxiety was like worse, specifically like second half of my cycle, which is common with PMDD. Like rage, which is not my personality at all. Um, and then I developed orthostatic intolerance, which goes hand in hand with the dysautonomia. So that's when it's difficult to be in an upright position. Um, so like even sitting in a chair like this would have been really, really difficult for me for a long time because I was so tired um, that it felt like I just like had to lay down. Um, so that made working really difficult because I was an elementary school music teacher. Um, so eventually I had seen a ton of different specialists to try to figure out what was going on. Um, my primary care doctor is pretty good. She thought that I either had dysautonomia or chronic fatigue syndrome or both. So I was able to get referred to a specialist who is studying chronic fatigue syndrome. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of doctors don't believe in it because there's not enough research, I guess, to convince a lot of doctors, and it's not a requirement for them to study in med school. And then even in like the holistic space, a lot of people don't really believe in it because I've heard a lot of people say it's not a real thing, it's just a collection of symptoms, which to me, that's kind of what a diagnosis is anyway. um, I've heard a lot of people like in the functional space say like it's not real, it's just mold illness, it's just parasites, it's just Lyme disease, it's just toxins, which to me, that's not a very holistic way of looking at things. To me, it's pretty obvious that these health issues have been building up over time, and I think it's just a combination of things that have kind of triggered the dysautonomia and CFS.
Sure. Obviously, huge progress has been made. I knew before you came on. And just so everyone knows this, if this is, gosh forbid, your first time listening, we don't always interview people who are at 100% fixed. In fact, that's really rare. That's probably like 10% of the people that come on. I'm much more interested in interviewing people who are on the journey or who can just show people what's possible, right? Because you're talking about some severe stuff. The one thing I'd like to ask, though, before we talk about, because you already alluded to this idea of this chiropractor, hey, I got introduced to this. So it sounds like you're similar to most of us in that there was zero awareness of this holistic modality or model for some of these health conditions. And yet you were still very much actively involved in life. You mentioned school, high school, right? And all the stuff that you were doing there. You mentioned college. You mentioned being an elementary school music teacher. So you're still doing the stuff that all of us have to do on a daily basis while dealing with all this. So I have to ask, especially during the worst of this and not having a holistic perspective at all, can I ask, like, what the hell were you thinking the whole time? Like, what was going on is what I mean. I don't mean, like, what were you thinking in terms of what were you doing? Like a parent says that to someone. I mean, what was actually going through Kristen's head at this time as you're experiencing these things and not getting answers?
I think honestly, for a long time, I just thought I'm just an anxious person. I must be having panic attacks because if you've had a panic attack before, like your heart races, your breathing is really fast. It's very similar to like the symptoms that you get with dysautonomia. So I just figured I must just be really anxious for no reason. So, but it eventually got worse and worse and worse, where I was like, there's something going on and I have to figure it out.
Do you, and I'm sorry if this is too specific of a question, so no worries if not, do you remember what happened or roughly what point that was that this went from, hey, I interpret this as severe anxiety to realizing it is in fact something more?
I think just as all of the symptoms got worse, and I had been seeing so many different doctors, um, I had mentioned like I have a history of fainting, so even when I was young, I kind of always felt like something was wrong with me. But every time I went to the doctor, they couldn't find anything. I had seen a cardiologist as a kid because I experienced shortness of breath and like heart palpitations after exercise. Um, so I think some of it goes way back then. But in probably 2019 or 2020, around that time, I got like extensive blood work done. I ended up fainting, which I know lots of people faint during blood draw, but this was different. I had never fainted during blood draw, um, but I was not unconscious, but I guess unresponsive for 15 minutes. They said my heart rate was 30, my blood pressure was 50/20, which is super low. And when I woke up, the doctor was like, I think you should go to the ER. They called an ambulance. Um, I got referred to a cardiologist. I told him what happened. He laughed at me and he said, there's no way you would have been unresponsive for 15 minutes because we wouldn't be having this conversation if you were. And I don't think there's anything wrong with you, but I'll run the lab work anyway. So I think like that interaction just made me feel like no one was going to help me unless I kind of figure it out.
When, so I'm just to be clear, when he ran that lab work, did that come back as Western medicine normal or what was on that one?
Um, I had to have an ultrasound of my heart. I had to wear a heart monitor. It all that came back was inappropriate sinus tachycardia, which meant that my heart rate was really high when it shouldn't be.
Sure.
They had me do an exercise stress test. I had to get my heart rate up to like 165. And then they have you sit down and they just like monitor you for 10 minutes. And my heart rate wouldn't come back down. And they're like, oh, you just calm down, think happy thoughts. And I was like, well, this is why I'm here because this is what happens after exercise. And then they sent me home and like never really told me
So
anything else.
from a non-medical perspective, because you didn't have a background in this, you're assuming it's anxiety, which is, I think,
Hmm.
actually very fair. Especially, again, people don't, and I'm not saying that this is true for everyone, but there's a lot of people that use the word panic attack when what they meant was large amounts of anxiety, which it's not a competition, but a panic attack, I know what you talk about. You feel like you're going to
Hmm.
die. It is a wild experience one time, let alone if you're having like true panic disorder where this is happening all the time. So it is actually reasonable, in my opinion, especially again for someone who doesn't have a medical background at the time, to assume that some of these things could be with that. But it almost sounds like the medical system's gaslighting you into thinking it's just anxiety too. Like, what are you
Hmm.
supposed to think if that's what they say? Like, oh, you just need to calm down. Of course, you're going to validate yourself almost, and that, oh yeah, it must be that anxiety thing. So I'm sorry this happened. This sucks, but at the same time, it's these stories that, man, they make for the most powerful practitioners. So I'd love to kind of get into this part of it now. So you said the chiropractor was kind of your first introduction to maybe, all right, I can do something holistic for my immune system or allergies. What even led you to go into the chiropractor? Were you going for that intention or was it like, hey, my back hurts? What was that about?
I went because I had neck pain
Okay.
because so I was a music major. I play flute, so I think my posture was kind of messed up from that.
Okay.
I had a friend who went to that chiropractor and I lived down the road from her. So, yeah, that's how I found it initially. And she was talking about how like chiropractic can help your immune system, and that didn't make any sense to me at the time. And then I was also diagnosed with like GERD at the time, and she was like, "Oh, a lot of people actually have too not enough stomach acid." So like I was kind of learning about that with her too. So, yeah, I just learned.
I only ask because this is kind of remarkable in a sense because I had a feeling, like gut feeling, that you didn't go to the chiropractor because you know you were just starting this holistic journey. It was something else. So you end up going there. That's the seed that gets planted for this holistic model. And yet you were going for neck pain initially. That's kind of amazing. So when you get your eyes open to this idea that, hey, maybe there's something I can do about all this stuff. Maybe it's not just anxiety all the time. What were the next steps? Because these sound like the first steps to actual healing.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I guess just my eyes were open to the idea that it was
Okay.
possible. So, um, somehow it helped with my immune system. I was able to get off like a lot of the allergy medicines. I think I took some of the supplements that she sold. So, and then I was just able to try to recover a little bit.
I'll word it a better huge difference between the Kristen as the music teacher that goes in to the chiropractor for neck pain and now the Kristen that is a graduated FDN hopping on the podcast. So what I guess I want to know is what is the journey between point A, the chiropractor versus, hey, I'm going to actually go pursue this and then decide to make this a career path. That's what I would definitely want to know.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, a lot of my issues continue to get worse. So I actually started working with an FDN. So after seeing so many doctors, I just felt obviously like we were missing something. I thought at the time that all of my issues must be caused by like one thing. So I was kind of obsessed with like finding that one thing. I thought it was hormones at the time. So, I found an FDN, Leah Brueggemann. I think she did a talk with FDN the other day. So I found her and I worked with her. So that's how I found FDN. And then I decided I've always had an interest in like science and biology and those things. So I decided to do the FDN course. I had money saved up for graduate school and I did FDN instead. So
Nice. So did you just find Leah on like Instagram or something? I know that's how most of the people come to her.
I just decided one day I was going to listen to a podcast. So I typed in Balancing Hormones Naturally, which ended up being her podcast, and I
Nice.
listened to it.
Nice.
And she was also a musician, so I was like, okay, I'll keep listening to this.
Uh, Man, I hate to make this a business plug for people, but because you probably see this in the graduate group, it's like we tell people all the time, you never know who's listening. I mean, look at this. You just search randomly and you happen to find Leah is getting bigger now, but my God, when I first started talking to her, this wasn't anything crazy. She actually started her business. She said it wasn't even intended to do that. She just started sharing her experience and people started tagging along. They started reaching out to her and she's like very chill. She's like, oh, Maybe I'll start doing that. Like, and then all of a sudden that's the course of her life. And she's having this amazing impact now. And she was on, our Health Space Unmasked this past weekend, which is it's a pretty big privilege. Like they only let so many people on there. So that's really cool. So you end up going through FDN. And again, I'll set the frame here for people. FDN is not promised to be a magic bullet. There is no system out there yet that's a magic bullet, especially when someone is dealing with this caliber of health issues. But I am curious, how far along did you get both working with Leah and then FDN? Because I guess FDN almost acted as a retest for you at that point. So this is a powerful combination. So what were some of the improvements going through these things?
Yeah, so when I started working with Leah, we did like some hormone tests, which obviously was kind of out of whack. She also ran an HTMA on me, so the hair tissue mineral analysis, which showed that my minerals were super low, specifically my electrolytes. So that was kind of fascinating since my doctor had kept saying, I really think you have an electrolyte problem, but the blood work was normal. So working with her, I initially felt a lot better within the first few weeks. And then I started to get worse. And then my HTMA retest, my minerals like barely moved. So she told me like she sees that a lot with people who have mold illness. So I was very skeptical of that at first. But then it started to make a lot of sense. I started to put the puzzle pieces together. So at the time I was working at two different elementary schools. They were both very, very old, very moldy, had lots of water leaks. Um, and what was interesting is when I started that job, I noticed every time I stepped into the building, I would have allergy symptoms and headaches. But when I left the building, I would feel better. And I was not the only teacher who felt that way. There are lots of other teachers who had to take allergy medicine when they were inside the building. So I kind of started to put those pieces together that it might be mold.
I don't know. I feel like such an idiot right now because I don't know if I know you listen to the podcast. I don't know if you know this. I speak in schools, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about, wow, we're locking these kids in these boxes with artificial light all day. Like that's always, and the terrible food, that's what I'm going to. I do not know why it has never dawned on me that, yeah, a lot of these schools, they are quite old, some of them,
Yeah.
especially some of the ones I've been in. And of course they would be subject to these things. Like it's kind of hard to maintain. They're just large buildings. Like they're hard to maintain in that way. I have never even thought about the fact that we are probably sticking some kids, perhaps like you and I at one point, who knows what the hell we were exposed to when we were 9 years old. We're going to this place that is, government forced to go learn, and yet we're fed crappy food. We're under the artificial lights all day. We're forced to do things that we don't want to do. And then on top of it, we might have mold in the building itself. I never even thought about that. So do you believe I guess it's a tough question. Do you believe it's possible, or do you even know if you were exposed to mold before that? Or was it just like, hey, I know the elementary school for sure, but maybe nothing else?
Definitely before. The
Okay.
apartment that I lived in prior to that had like visible black mold all over the bathroom ceiling. And I lived with like four other roommates. And I remember saying at the time, like, I hope this doesn't affect our health, but I just kind of thought it was gross. So I think that's when a lot of my symptoms had originally started to get a lot worse.
Was
And then
that like college Kristen, post-college Kristen living with these people?
post college, yeah.
You're
And
like, all right,
then
guys,
the
whatever.
pandemic happened, so then I'm like stuck there.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I'm only laughing up. It's literally funny, but I've heard this before where, and I get it. I probably would have been in the same boat that, especially when you're younger, you're looking at it like, oh yeah, that sucks. It's a little gross. Okay. What do you guys want for dinner tonight? Because we're
Yeah.
just young people and we're not really thinking about that stuff. It's not like we just bought a home or something. We're like sardining in with a bunch of people. So that is scary as hell. Okay, so you find out about the mold thing, and it sounds like that's probably, considering this was also an issue for you before the elementary schools, I'm guessing this was a pretty big part of the healing here. So did you guys do testing on you specifically for mold?
So after like I worked with her I think for 4 months and then I started the FDN course. So I just ran a mycotoxin test on myself. I tested super high for two different mycotoxins, and interestingly, one of them is actually used as an immunosuppressant for organ transplants because it suppresses the immune system
Oh,
so
okay.
much. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, so for about the past 2 years, I've kind of been slowly working on mold. And then, so when I was a teacher, I ended up taking a medical leave of absence in December of that year to just try to see if I could get better, go on doctor's appointments. Um, and so within a week of being out of that environment, I was feeling better. My husband and I went like cross country skiing for an hour or something like that, and I felt fine. I didn't have any of the symptoms. Then when I went back to work in January, all the symptoms came back within 2 days. Um, Ended up kind of just trying to push through and work there the rest of the year. Um, and then the apartment that we lived in ended up having a water leak that maintenance would not fix. So I was just kind of exposed to mold like 24/7 for that.
Was your husband experiencing stuff from this? Because I think I'm getting to something here with like the genetics behind this and the other
Hmm.
things that someone might have going on that lead to getting sick. But was he having any symptoms?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, I had a very similar situation, not in terms of the severity of symptoms, to be clear, but my fiance and I were just in an apartment, and thankfully we got out of it. But I had that thing. I don't think I've heard anyone else say that on the podcast. You described this gasping and waking up trying to catch your breath, and maybe that was mold at the time, maybe it wasn't. I have no
Hmm.
idea, but I got that from freaking mold. It's scary as
Yeah.
hell when you are sleeping and it's 3 a.m. and you wake up because you're like, I think I just either couldn't breathe or I'm choking. And then now you're scared because I'm waking you up and scaring the hell out of you. Like, and then the last thing you want to do is go sleep after that because you're afraid of that happening again. So there's a lot of, my point in mentioning this is that mold is very much something to pay attention to, but there is a bit of nuance here, and there's other factors that can be at play. So when you went through the FDN course, we're running the foundational labs. For those that don't know, you have those included in the cost of tuition. So we're looking at hormones, we're looking at gut stuff, a bunch of things actually. Were there, I don't even know why I'm asking, were there? I should ask it this way. What were the significant findings on those labs? Because I'm guessing there was still some stuff on there too.
Yeah, so we thankfully moved to a different apartment.
Mhm.
I think by the time I did those tests, I was feeling a lot better. But it was really interesting to correlate the results with my symptoms and with some of the research that they've been doing for chronic fatigue syndrome. A lot of it correlated. So HPA axis dysfunction, so exhaustive face, not surprising with all the fatigue. So like really low cortisol. Um, Super high oxidative stress, like off the charts. Couldn't even measure how high it was. Histamine, high histamine, which makes sense with the allergy symptoms, especially with the mold. Um, Pretty wiped out gut flora, which was not surprising because I've been on a lot of antibiotics. Um, Trying to think, I think that's pretty much it.
Okay.
So
But
yeah,
so
definitely
yeah,
core.
plenty of stuff to work on.
Yeah, lots of stuff.
So you graduate FDN last year. Did I remember that correctly?
Mhm.
All right. And then you keep talking about the teaching in the past tense. So are you already doing FDN full time, or is it a part time thing mixed with something else?
Yeah, so after that year, I ended up quitting my job. I actually showed up to the first 2 days of school hoping that I was, because I felt better over the summer. Um, it was very obvious that I was not going to be able to do it. So then I quit. I ended up working for the chiropractor that I mentioned before. I worked for her for the past year. And then I think this past September, I left that and I've slowly been getting into FDN full time.
Nice. That's awesome. Oh my God. I don't want to keep going back to this because I actually don't even want to think about it in a sense. I cannot get over this realization that doesn't even sound that profound, but somehow I haven't thought about these kids in these schools. We know like 25% of people will have the HLA-DR gene. And it's like,
Mhm.
okay, so you were sick and thankfully, thank God you can leave and have the awareness to even realize what it is. I'm like, how many kids and teachers for that matter? There's probably teachers in there too, like you said, dealing with symptoms
Mhm.
that either don't understand how severe it is or have no idea that that's actually what's going on. Like, my gosh, like what that's, I don't know if that's my cross to carry in this lifetime, but someone listening, that is a very ethical business to go pursue, is maybe some mold testing in schools and getting that the hell figured out. Holy crap.
Yeah.
Okay. So on a positive note, I'm so impressed that even through all this, you're doing the FDN thing in terms of like actually really starting to take clients and move on with this. So, can we talk about where are you at now health wise? And I will disclaim again, we're not expecting perfection. That would actually be insane given how much stuff you've dealt with. But what I do notice, because again, there's stuff that you can pick up on people or with people when you do these interviews, and you're very verbally fluent. And when someone's highly sick, they start going all over the place. And I'm not condemning anyone who's been on the show that's been in that. It's just a reality. So it seems like something's coming back here and we're getting some spark and life back, which I love to see and hear. So where are you at now health wise?
Um, I was able to achieve remission. I was in remission for 6 months, which is the longest I've been able to achieve over the past 6 years. And then I still have like the ups and downs. So I'm actually coming out of like a 3 month flare. But I'm feeling good again. It's just like one day you wake up and you feel terrible, and then sometimes you wake up and you feel great again. Um, so I'd say maybe like 80% better.
Nice.
But yeah, I feel like I know what to do when I don't feel well. And so if I do that, I have a better chance of feeling better and not feeling horrible.
I think that's one of the most powerful parts about being an FDN, or honestly, even an FDN's client. Not that it's going to be exactly the same, but you do get equipped with these tools and just the knowledge and the hope to say, oh, no, I can go do this. Even if you don't know exactly what to do in that moment, there's this hope that, okay, at least I have all these other resources that I can go to. Do you, perhaps this is an ignorant question, otherwise, I guess you wouldn't have done it, but I am curious, are you starting to become aware, like if you have this 6 month remission and then there's this flare, I mean, we both live in a cause and effect reality. Like, are you aware of what might have caused that, or is it not so clear yet at this time?
It's not very clear. It
Okay.
it seems it just happens randomly. But I know like when I went through the FDN course, they were talking about the healing crisis. Um, so sometimes I'm like, maybe it was that.
Yeah, no, and this is a game of two step forward, one step back for sure. And if we've dealt with these things in the past, it doesn't take a whole. It's not that we don't become more resilient, we do, but it doesn't take all that much to push us back. Like we got to live a little bit differently than other people because there's been stuff going on. If I'm gonna guess your age. You don't have to say it, but I'm guessing this has been a 2-decade journey, at least at this point, from the first symptoms at 9.
Mhm.
So yeah, man, we're probably going to have to change some things up. I know that there's going to be some listeners that are wondering this, and I'm personally curious myself. What is the dietary approach to all of this look like? I mean, I feel like gluten-free and stuff's par for the course, but I'm curious, what's the recipe here that has worked out for you thus far, and what are you doing?
Yeah, definitely gluten free. So I had like really terrible bloating issues for a long time. So I did an elimination diet thinking that gluten was not going to be a problem for me, and it definitely was. So that helps a lot. I don't know if I have celiac disease, but I do notice when I even get cross-contaminated, that can make symptoms a lot worse. Even with like the mental health anxiety and panic gets worse if I've had gluten. So strictly gluten free, and then just mostly whole foods, not a lot of processed stuff, trying to balance my blood sugar.
Do you, because you mentioned the bloating was an earlier symptom and you seem to associate it with the gluten. Do you think this is kind of tough, but is it fair to say that that might have been a sensitivity? Let's call it a sensitivity that you've had for the entirety of this health journey. Do you think that's accurate? Maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Because I remember growing up when I would eat things like pizza, pasta, I would get so full that my stomach would hurt, but I thought that's what it felt like to be full. And then when I went gluten free, I can eat the same things but gluten free, and I don't have that feeling. So,
The reason I ask, and this is a grossly oversimplified way of looking at the chronic disease epidemic, and I don't think it's everyone by any means, but my mom and I both have that as well. Like measured real immune sensitivity to this, and we know that for a fact. And it's not celiac. We've both been tested for that as well, endoscopy even. And so the reason I ask is because it's always fascinating to me when I get these stories of like someone who is really comparatively speaking, quite sick at a really young age. And then you look at something like a food, could be gluten, could be something else, but you look at something like a food and it kind of makes the most sense that it would have triggered these things at that time, or at least it should be one of the culprits that we look at, because the standard American is doing something like cereal for breakfast, sandwich for lunch, pasta for dinner, cookies for a snack. So it's like, well, of course, if you're sensitive to this and consuming it all day, every day for the entirety of one's life, yeah, that can lead to a lot of stress. And then all this other stuff starts coming out. And all of a sudden, you and I are the people that are living in the apartment or the room with mold. And, the other person, the fiance or husband, feels actually they're doing okay. They're not perfect, but they're doing okay. And we're sitting there like dying, gasping for breath in the middle of the night. So I just think it's not that I'm trying to oversimplify it to a gluten thing. That's not the only issue that people have by any means. But when I hear these childhood things, I almost always go to, okay, is there a known dietary thing here at this point? Because I feel like what else is, other than trauma, fair enough, but like what else is causing a very young kid to be chronically ill? So that's my thesis here with all this stuff. So Kristen, you've moved into this space now of working with people, and I'm going to ask a few sets of questions, both for the client perspective, but also for the fellow practitioner perspective. I think there's many people that would hear this story and say, and I'm one of them, be like, holy crap, this person's impressive because they've had all this going on and they're still pushing through to do this. And there's a time and place to push, and there's a time and place to obviously back off a little bit. And it sounds like you've actually tried to balance those things with like taking medical leave and all these things. So where do you start, I guess, if you're still going through so much of this? Because it's not like it's perfect yet. How do you even begin to fathom starting a business? And what is your advice to some of the other practitioners out there that are not perfect in their health, but want to go help people? And they're just like, I can't do both at once.
Oh, yeah, good question. So for me, I just kind of started sharing my story on Instagram. And a lot of people kept telling me they were interested and they appreciated hearing it. So I kept doing that. And then when I was going through the course, I had a friend reach out to me who said that she wanted to work with me. So I've been working with her for over a year now. And then just gotten a few other clients, friends and family.
Okay, so very similar to Leah here. So just to be clear, when you were sharing your story, are you a secret social media influencer? Do you have a $5,000 camera and mic set up? Or do you have Alex Hormozy style reels that are super attractive? Or was it just, hey, I'm just sharing a story as a human being?
Yeah, just my personal private Instagram.
Yeah. Oh, and private. That's the best part. So it's like, guys, look at the stats. There's a bunch of people out there that are dealing with these types of symptoms, even, but certainly just general autoimmunity, general skin issues, general gut issues. If you speak, they shall come. Like, that's really how this goes. So I always think it's amazing that people just start doing that. And I wasn't using Instagram at the time, but I did this on Facebook. I wasn't even trying to attract clients. I was just talking about what I dealt with. It was a form of therapy for me, quite frankly. I wanted people to know what the hell I was going through my whole life. And then you do find that you get the direct message or the private one, or they're like, hey, can I have your phone number? And then they're like, dude, by the way, I know we've been acquaintances for like 10 years and I've never told you this. I also deal with the same stuff and I would really like some help. So it can be, it's not simple, but it can be that straightforward sometimes. So have you then, I'm guessing at this point, have you taken clients through a whole process, or are most of the clients that you're working with still actively working with you? I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, has someone gone through and completed a program with you, or are you still working with people who are in the programs that you have?
Still working with people in the program.
Okay.
So the person who's been working with me for a year, she had a lot of stuff come up that she couldn't end up doing the testing. So she's like working through her protocols right now, and yeah, so she'll hopefully be done soon.
It's okay. So then, with that known, I again, we're not expected full transformations here. I'm just wondering, is there anyone then that's come to you kind of feeling like I imagine you felt, just at the end of the rope with this stuff, not knowing what the hell's going on, and then you were able to help them get like the needle moving and start getting them moving in the right direction? I'd even love to hear something like that, to the degree that you're able to share for privacy's sake.
Yeah, so that same client, I actually knew her in college. We were friends in college. She was an accountant. She was working like 50 hours a week. She was super stressed. She seemed like really depressed and anxious and just completely overwhelmed. So she actually ended up quitting her job, and then we've implemented different parts of her protocol, and she has a lot more energy now. Um, like she looks like she's like happy to like be here and interact with people, because she was just like so burnt out before. So yeah, it's just been cool to see her transformation and how I guess I've been a part of that.
Yeah. Oh, it's fun to watch life come back in people, man. And they do the work, but to be able to like guide them, especially when we've been through it, like we get it. That is the coolest thing in the world. I think she actually listens to the show, so I want to be very private about this one. But we had someone come into our in-person business, Maddie and I, and very young person, like our age, actually a little younger. And she was sick enough that, put it this way, she was like verbally told me that, hey, I'm giving this about a year. And you mean like, well, what do you mean you're giving it about a year? What she meant was, if I can't figure this out within a year, like, I don't want to be here on this earth anymore. That's basically, I'll leave it at that. And when you see that, like, one, I'm like, okay, no, can't take that. That's not going to happen. But two, that's where these people are at, man. That's where some of us get to mentally. And so to be able to bring them back to life, literally and figuratively, is the coolest thing in the world. And her health isn't perfect yet. We're not at the year mark. Her health is not perfect yet, but she's able to go live again. She's able to do things and go out with people and just experience life to some degree. And it's not that everything needs to be perfect. You even said yourself, it's probably about 80% better. What we need to see is progress. We need to know that when I wake up each day, I actually have a chance here of getting 1% better and then 1% better again. When we feel like we're stagnant, or even worse, declining in health, that's when this stuff's really scary. So just to be able to provide hope to people, you don't even need to do a lab test, guys, for that. That's sometimes just sharing stories like the one on this podcast. So, all right. What is next for you on your health journey? And the disclaimer on this one is that Kristen's already done all the foundational labs. She's done all the stuff. She did the coaching. So she already said that. So I'm just curious, what is next for you? Are you like actively focusing on any specific tests or therapies? Or are you kind of just letting what you're already doing go along?
So I just did an HTMA on myself. So like with dysautonomia, I need a lot of sodium and a lot of electrolytes. So I feel like I'm just tired of like guessing what I need. So I did an HTMA. I had a consult yesterday with Lisa from Vicon. So that's like my most recent thing. Um, and then yeah, just figuring out the rest of the layers.
Cool. And no mold in the place that you're living in now?
Hopefully not.
All right, cool. Where can people find you if they're interested in working with you? And I'll add to this question if I may. Who is it that you're trying to work with now? Is it people with medical conditions, or is there a certain personality that you like to work with? So I'll reword it and say, who do you like to work with? Who do you best serve? And then where can they find you?
I like to work with other women who are in their 20s and 30s who are dealing with chronic stress and fatigue, and then especially people who might have or suspect ME/CFS and dysautonomia. And then my website is functionalflowwellness.com, and then my Instagram is functionalflowwellness.
Cool. All right. Our signature question on today's show. And if you've ever it's one thing to listen to the podcast. I don't know if you've ever been able to handle a full 50 minutes of me. So we'll see if you ever heard the signature question. It is this: if I could give you a magic wand and you could wave it and get every single person in this world to do one thing for their health. So that means you can force us to start doing one thing, or you can force us to stop doing one thing. With all that you have been through and had to research, what the heck is the one thing that you'd get us to do?
Trust your gut. When there's something going on, there's probably something going on.
Awesome. Kristen, thank you so much for coming on today. And again, I'll go back to what I said in the beginning. There's nothing wrong with sharing a story when it was 20 years ago. Sometimes I feel like I'm in that category, not that it was 20 years ago, but I feel like I'm very much on the other side of this. So it's almost easier to share. There's something very powerful and vulnerable about when someone comes on and they're fresh off of it or still in the midst. And it's kind of a combination here. I think it's that much more relatable. So we just appreciate you so much.